But let's go to Texas Democrat Congressman Al Green, who served with John Lewis in Congress for many years. A pleasure to have you in, Congressman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Asman. It's my honor to be with you. And if I may, I'd like to send a shout out to my friend Martin King, who was on.
Oh, he's wonderful.
He absolutely is. I had the honor of going to India with him. And much of what we have said about John Lewis, we can attribute to him as well. If I may just send my expressions and my sympathies to the family and friends of the Honorable John Lewis, I hope that they will make it through these troubling times.
Well, they are troubling times, and you know, we had enough on our plate already, and going through the death in the family is just an added burden. But we will be listening to them shortly. But let's talk about John Lewis's life for a second, and your work with him. What was it like to actually work with John Lewis?
Well, it was a great experience, a learning experience for me. Our age difference is only a few years. I think I'm about 6 years younger than he, maybe a little bit more. But he was a true believer in the truest sense of the word. He truly did believe that Carlyle was right. No lie can live forever. He believed that William Cullen Bryant was right. Truth crushed to earth shall rise again. But he believed that Dr. King was right about the arc of the moral universe being long but bending toward justice. And he sought to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. And he did it in a very calm but a very prophetic way. He did it by not only speaking truth, but living truth. He was the sermon that he preached. He didn't say we ought to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge and then find something else to do on that day. He was there. And not only was he there, but he was at the front of the line when they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And so he walked his talk. And it was an honor to know somebody who every day tried to improve the lives of all of the people, not just black people, Mr. Asman, but all people.
Well, first of all, you can call me David, please. But beyond that, how was he as a negotiator? Because a lot of what you guys do in Congress is talk to people who don't necessarily believe as you do and try to convince them to come your way. How was he as negotiating and compromising, bringing people on board?
Well, negotiation has a lot to do with the strength of the person who is negotiating. And he came from a position of righteousness. It was very difficult to differ with him because he embraced issues that had a quality associated with justice and truth. And with that on his side, he was a very formidable negotiator because he had much of what you wanted to negotiate for. And you found yourself questioning whether or not you wanted to be on the wrong side of history when you opposed what he did. Some of his votes actually influenced the passage of votes. People would ask, where is John Lewis on some of the great issues of our time related to human rights and human dignity? And if John Lewis was there, it gave others a degree of comfort, knowing that they had him as a part of this. It gave them a degree of comfort in standing with him. They stood with the vote, but they also knew that they were standing with John Lewis, and that was important.
How about people who didn't believe as he did on various policies? Did he give them time and hear them out?
He did. He was a fair-minded person. He would hear anybody out. He might not agree with everyone, but he would take the time to listen. And those who differed with him and those that he differed with, because he didn't agree with everyone, they respected him. I don't think that there's a person in Congress who didn't have a high level of respect for the Honorable John Lewis, and they showed it in the way they addressed him in a general sense and in the elevators as we moved through the halls, speaking to each other. His level of respect was high. This is why many have styled him the conscience of the Congress. And I think that he wore that title quite well.
And we talked to Mr. King about this moments ago. I'm sure you heard that, but he did have an idea of becoming a pastor at one point in his life early on, and his being able to pull from that faith must have made a difference in the work that he did and the relationships that he formed inside Congress.
He was a person of great faith, and I've heard the story that my dear friend Martin spoke of with reference to preaching to the chickens. And I can remember on at least one occasion, I think he may have said, and I think some of those chickens may have been saved, but he truly had a spirit that exuded his faith. He believed in doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. He believed in letting people live their lives, but also helping them to live their lives. I don't think his motto, if you would be live and let live. His would be live and help live. Not just keep people alone to their own devices, but to try to improve the lives of people.
Yeah.
Not live and let live, but live and help live.
Congressman Al Green, great pleasure to talk to you as well. I know your heart is going to be in this next week, and please pass on our condolences to John Lewis's family, who I'm sure you'll meet with over the coming week. Thank you very much for being here.
Do me one small favor. Tell Mr. Cavuto that I said hello, and I hope he's doing well.
Of course, he's just on a break. He's just on a vacation. The guy works hard. He needs some time off. Thank you, Al Green. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.